This morning, we are getting an exclusive first look at MSNBC's town hall with newly elected Speaker Nancy Pelosi at her alma mater, Trinity Washington University here in D.C. In the Speaker's first major interview since getting back the gavel, she weighed in on the latest impeachment call coming from a member of her own party.
Speaker Pelosi, last night at a reception for MoveOn.org, one of your new members, Rashida Tlaib, who is newly elected Congresswoman from Michigan, used some colorful language to talk about what would happen to Donald Trump, to the president, saying, quote, "We're going to go in and impeach the MFer." Your reaction to that comment?
I probably have a generational reaction to it. But in any event, I'm not in the censorship business. I don't think that, I mean, I don't like that language. I wouldn't use that language. I don't, again, establish any language standards for my colleagues. But I don't think it's anything worse than what the president has said.
Fair enough. But I guess the question would be, does that kind of discussion of impeachment on that level help the cause of oversight in general, or does it make impeachment more likely, less likely? Does it impact the actual trajectory of oversight?
I think it probably consolidates his base, but I don't think they need much consolidation. I don't think it makes that much difference. No.
So you're not concerned at all about the way that the president's base will react to the idea of an incoming Democratic caucus coming in with the idea already pre-baked into the cake? They're going to go and get them. You guys are going to go get them.
Well, you have to weigh the equities. That is not the position of the House Democratic Caucus.
Sure.
And the equity to be weighed that's freedom of speech of an individual member. As I say, generationally, that would not be language I would use.
Sure.
But nonetheless, I don't think we should make a big deal of it. I really don't.
Okay.
I really don't. That's probably the way people talk around. Again, I'm a grandmother, and that's a different story.
Right.
But it's really, words weigh a ton. And the president has to realize that his words weigh a ton, too. And some of the words that he used has a direct impact on people's lives. My colleagues' comments do not have an impact on people's lives.
Here with more on that exclusive sit-down, the moderator of that town hall, MSNBC's Joy Reid, still in place in front of the area where she did that interview. Joy, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Sure thing, Hallie. Great to be here.
You just spent an hour plus with Nancy Pelosi in this town hall. It's going to air later tonight on MSNBC. But what was your biggest takeaway from the time that you spent with her on really her first full day as Speaker? What stands out to you the most?
Well, I can tell you that this is a confident politician. Nancy Pelosi is incredibly confident in her position. She's confident in her caucus. She's very proud of her caucus. You just played that long answer on the Rashida Tlaib comments about Donald Trump. Speaker Pelosi went on to say that, look, if Rashida Tlaib was a man, would we be making so much of these comments? And she came back over and over again to the point that what really matters are the president's actions and how those actions impact people, whether they're impacting immigrant children or whether they're impacting the environment, the air we breathe, the water that we drink. She came back to that point over and over again, that what she's concerned about is what the president is doing and what the House will do in terms of oversight of that, not what another member is saying.
And she made very clear in that little clip that we just saw that that is not the impeachment idea, is not the position right now pre-baked in of the House Democratic Caucus. But what is her threshold for that? Did she get into that with you?
So she wouldn't give a specific threshold for what would lead her to believe that impeachment was appropriate. She went in and she talked about the fact that the impeachment of Bill Clinton, in her view, was wrong, was purely political. She doesn't want to see a purely political process. She made the point with Nixon, you had a negotiation to avoid impeachment in which he resigned, and that for her, she wants to see the Mueller probe. She wants to see what's in it. She wants to see whether crimes were committed, whether there's evidence of that's put on the table by Robert Mueller. It sounds like she wants to let the process play out. She did make a point of the fact that there will be oversight, whether it's Ways and Means, which potentially could get Donald Trump's tax returns, whether it's the other oversight committees. She wants to see robust oversight, and it looks like we will see that. But she's not ready to, at this point, take the position that impeachment is right now a foregone conclusion.
We're also in the middle of a government shutdown, and it doesn't seem like a solution is close at hand. In about 45 minutes, she'll be heading over to the White House to meet with the president. Did she give you a sense of how confident she's feeling that there could be some kind of a breakthrough, or is this just sort of going through the motions at this point?
It sounded like, basically from the position of the speaker, there can be a breakthrough if Donald Trump backs down. She is not backing down. She's not backing down on this idea that Congress will not appropriate money to build a wall. And as we know, Mexico has said they won't pay for it. So what we have is an old-fashioned standoff here in which the House is saying they're not going to appropriate tax money for the wall. So she's going in with that as her negotiating stance. And in her view, Donald Trump has to come to the realization that it's not going to happen, but that border security can happen, that important things can be done on immigration, but that the thing that's not going to happen is the House of Representatives appropriating money for his wall.
All right, Joy Reid. Joy, thank you so much for coming on from Trinity. I'll let you get back up to New York. You will see more of Joy's interview tonight in a special town hall. The Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, airs at 10 o'clock Eastern right here on MSNBC. Thank you for checking out our YouTube channel. Why don't you subscribe? It's really easy. Just click on that button down there. And for more news from MSNBC, click on any of these videos here for the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more videos from MSNBC with our newsletters. Head over to msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up.